First, is Nigel Farage right to call Boris Johnson our worst Prime Minister? Things are kicked off between these two, even though they've, you'd think they've got quite a lot in common. They clashed yesterday after Mr. Johnson called the Reform leader morally repugnant for standing by his suggestion that the West had provoked Russia into attacking Ukraine by expanding the EU and NATO. This is a reminder of what Farage initially told the BBC.
I stood up in the European Parliament in 2014 and I said, and I quote, "There will be a war in Ukraine." Why did I say that? It was obvious to me that the ever eastward expansion of NATO and the European Union was giving this man a reason to his Russian people to say they're coming for us again and to go to war.
But you were echoing him.
Sorry.
You were echoing him. That's what Putin says.
No. Sorry, I've been saying this actually since the 1990s. Ever since the fall of the wall. But hang on a second. We've provoked this war. It's, of course it's his fault. He's used what we've done as an excuse.
But we provoked the invasion of Ukraine.
So Farage insisted he would never defend Vladimir Putin's reprehensible actions, as he called them. He's now hit back at Boris Johnson, saying he's a liar and a hypocrite. Standing in front of a newspaper front page from 2016 with the headline, "Boris blames EU for war in Ukraine," Mr. Farage went even further. Take a look.
This man will go down as the worst Prime Minister of modern times, a man who betrayed an 80-seat majority. Who opened the door to mass immigration? Boris Johnson. Who betrayed the will of Brexit voters? It was Boris Johnson. He pretended to be a Conservative, but he governed as a Green.
There's so much here. Because the Ukraine argument is an odd one, because Farage has said that before. So I don't know why it's suddenly a massive news story. But now it's kicked off between Farage and Johnson. Whose side would you choose in that fight?
Oh, Boris all the way.
Would you?
Absolutely. And look, whatever you think about Boris Johnson, at least he's got the gall to come out and call out Nigel Farage for what he is, which is a
But Boris, it turns out,
apologist.
had said it himself. That's the whole point.
Well, Boris has said a lot of things in his career, but I'm glad that Boris is now, obviously, if he's changed his mind, he's changed his mind. But he's doing the right thing, where I would want other senior Conservative politicians to do, which is to come out and say what he said about Nigel Farage, who, if you take the Russian state, who have made acts of aggression in the UK, sending agents to the UK where there was Novichok poisoning of 2 British citizens in this country. The Russian state is a bully in terms of Ukraine. You either stand up to bullies or you side with them. And whatever you think about Nigel Farage, whatever you think about the EU, by the way, you can perfectly legitimately vote for Brexit. Of course you can. If you think it was too bloated, costed too much, where money should have been spent in the UK, absolutely fine. But what you can't say, and it is totally wrong to say, that because of the ever-expanding EU or NATO, that has somehow been the provocation, and it's you and I and Gemma's and your audience's mistake that we should have just saddled with Russia a bit more. It is a justification of a war that is totally wrong.
OK, so you would take Boris's side. Whose side would you take?
I think this is one of the most grotesque sights ever. You've got two morally repugnant human beings. You've got a Putin apologist versus a Russian asset, basically, squabbling it out.
Hang on, which is which? Help
Boris Johnson. Well, Farage is being both, really.
Oh, I see. So the Russian asset is Boris.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Do you remember when he got paid, what was it, 160 grand to play tennis with the wife of a Russian minister? That. Right? And he let Russian donations from very powerful oligarchs flood into the Conservative Party.
But
you're correct, in 2014...
Isn't this ideal for you? Because you've got two people that you really don't like knocking 7 bells out of each other.
Yeah, but it's also, I feel sad. I mean, I don't enjoy these kind of grubby sites because I actually still love living here, and it's embarrassing. And the hypocrisy of Johnson. In 2014, as you say, he said exactly the same thing about Russia invading Ukraine. And the thing with Johnson, he does what suits him in that moment. So it suited him, and it was good, his support for Ukraine, absolutely. It's one thing you could say that he did well, but the motivation at the heart of anything with Johnson is Johnson. And, you know, they're both, as you say, whacking seven bells at each other. This is the perfect time to publish the unredacted Russia report. Let's have a look at that. Let's go back to when Johnson was mayor or whatever he was at the time, and foreign secretary, and he went off to the Lebedev villa for one of the lavish parties, lost his security, was pictured hungover, bedraggled sight in the airport. The next thing we know, this very powerful oligarch who was in the KGB, his son, is being put by Johnson into the House of Lords where he remains. Evgeny Lebedev, the Baron of Siberia.
Well,
so this argument that Johnson has a leg to stand on is ridiculous.
All right.
I don't know enough about that. I don't think
No, I lost track of that as well. But he is certainly, Lebedev is the son of a KGB bloke, and Lebedev is in the House of Lords, and that was very controversial. So, yeah, whatever.
Well, controversial things happen in politics,
Yeah.
but what we're talking about is national security. Well, we're talking about national security. Well, of course things are controversial in politics.
EastEnders.
Well, getting the Labour Party to define what a woman is controversial,
No,
apparently,
not really,
according to
because
them.
he cleared that up the other day, and that is...
Well, I don't think they have.
he did. He was quite good on
It's
that.
quite different to what
on
the Labour leaders say.
Question Time.
But the reality
Do you think
is,
that's the
this is
same
about,
as putting a Russian agent into the House of Lords?
No,
We
what
can
I'm
say
saying,
Russian agent.
I'm talking
I think
about,
that's where we probably draw
I'm
the
talking
line.
about national security here, and
His dad was KGB. That's true.
Exactly, and I'm talking about national security, where there is a real choice at
All
this
right.
election.
So
and if you're a disaffected, but the point is, if you're a disaffected Conservative, then you're thinking about voting reform. Or if anyone's thinking about voting reform because you don't think Labour represent you either, you've really got to look at what Nigel Farage has said and actually make a choice as to whether you think his
help
politics.
me with the logic, right? Because I listened to that interview with Farage. He said the same thing many times before, so I was confused as to why it led all the the bulletins. But he basically says this. He says, look, let's just think of an analogy. If you walk towards Tyson Fury and you go like that, he's probably going to hit you. It doesn't mean he's not saying Tyson Fury's to blame. He's still blaming Russia for doing it. He's just saying it's not a good idea to walk towards Tyson Fury like that. Right, so what's wrong with saying it?
No, because you're essentially saying, and I don't want to reduce...
Justifying it.
Well, he is justifying, but you're basically saying if you are a victim, say, of domestic abuse, you're saying that your partner, yes, it's totally wrong that your partner might be beating you and doing all kinds of nasty things, but you are responsible.
Okay,
You provoked it. That is totally and utterly wrong.
It's the short skirt argument.
His whole hook is he's supposed to be a British patriot, and this is just so unpatriotic.
All right, I still can't quite get my head around why it's caused this massive inflammation. Pat in Merseyside, hi. All right, let's go back to basics here. If you've got Boris and Farage having a fight. Who do you want to win this one?
Well, I think Farage is far cleverer politician and Boris is a bit of a buffoon. But I think actually Farage would be a better leader in the Conservative Party than Johnson ever was. Not that I'm a Conservative voter, far away from Conservative, but I think the only thing about Farage is that the Conservatives steer clear of them because he could shake up the vote a bit.
Well, yeah, you think because the people are saying...
I think he'd make a better leader for the Conservatives.
Well, it might happen.
And he is a would-be leader for the Conservatives if he ever gives up reform.
What about that, Charlie? Because your party's had every other leader, so it's kind of running out of options now.
Well, Pat, I'm sorry to say I disagree with you because... look, you've got two big beasts, yes, and they've both got great qualities. Both Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage are very able to communicate with the public. They have great orators, and maybe that's why Nigel has been able to have such a platform, because there is an absence of great communication at the top of our politics of our two main parties. But the reality is, what Nigel is saying is just fundamentally wrong. There is no room at the inn for people in the Conservative Party who are Russian apologists when this country and the Western world faces its biggest threat in such a long time, whether it's from Russia, whether it's from Iran, whether it's from China, whether it's from North Korea. Who do you actually want to stand up for British interests and the Western world? It is not being an apologist to Nigel, as Nigel Farage is to Putin. And I think that there is clearly some history between the two, because it was Boris Johnson that led the Vote Leave campaign, which Nigel obviously wanted to do, but it was Boris that won Brexit, not Nigel Farage. OK, so we'll talk a bit more after the break about this. But let's have some more calls on whether Nigel Farage is right to say Boris Johnson was our worst Prime Minister. I should have asked you both, who was you think, the worst Prime Minister? Gordon Brown, I should imagine.
Brown.
People remember him, that sort of, great lump that was in number 10 that sort of, fought all of his political life just to get the bloke next door out of number 10, Tony Blair, who actually I didn't think was that bad.
Yeah, he was terrible. First Climate Change Act, 2010 Equality Act, winter fuel allowance, lifting 500,000 children out of poverty,
All of Tony's
peace
good
in
work,
Northern
I'm sure.
Ireland, trebling of aid, maternity pay, paternity pay. Oh, it was awful, wasn't it? Sure Start
What
Centres.
an uplifting man he was, yes. What a leader of our nation.
So what? I don't need uplifting.
Well, he only did the job for 2 years, to be
You're
fair.
not going to get
so-
it under Sakir.
So
No.
who's your worst
I'm not
Prime
Labour.
Minister ever? Ever?
Johnson/Truss.
Right, so you put them on a par, would you? Yeah.
Well, I mean, she was just like a wrecking ball, wasn't she, for like 5 minutes, which was just catastrophic. So she did the most, like, boom, damage in the shortest period of time. But I think Johnson, on so many levels, is an absolute charlatan. I think he's just a liar. And I think if you look at the list of things that he did that, in my opinion, were really morally wrong, such as the Pincher thing, the Owen Paterson thing, the public funds to
Well, that was all
Jennifer
sticking up for
Curie,
his
the
mates,
unlawful
wasn't it? Yeah.
progress. Also, he was given, the argument was always this, oh, he's brilliant, he got an 80-seat majority. If you get something amazing and then you throw it in the bin, are you that
That
clever?
will always puzzle me, how he sort of threw it away like that.
And when
Now-
he backed Dominic Cummings over the lockdown breaches.
Yeah, OK.
Partygate.
We've gone into the full sort of K-Tel greatest hits now. Malcolm, not you, I mean just generally on Boris Johnson. Malcolm in Kent, hi.
Hi.
So, look, was Boris Johnson the worst ever Prime Minister? Because Farage says he was.
Probably, yeah.
OK, you sound like you've got a thought that maybe somebody else runs him close.
Yeah, would-be Prime Minister to be Farage. If Farage ever got the job, what a fool he'd be.
He'd be even worse.
Yeah.
OK. And what about Truss? Is she up there?
Who?
Good point.
That says it all.
Who else have we got? Let's just think.
Sunak. Long enough.
I mean, we don't have to go from the last 10 years. We've got long memories here. What about James Callaghan? What about Edward Heath? I don't
What
know.
about Cameron for calling the referendum?
Thanks, Malcolm. Good shout. Christine in Staffordshire. Oh, no, hang on. Christine, I think... Tony in Hampshire. Hello.
Hello.
Hello, Tony. Where are we today?
Where am I? Yeah, I'm in Hampshire.
Brilliant.
In between Pompey and Southampton.
OK. OK, Pompey's, that's what they call the team, isn't it? We're learning stuff all the time. So do you think Boris Johnson is the worst Prime Minister?
Yeah, well, look, first of all, I'm no Nigel Farage fan at all. But on this one, it's probably the only thing I would agree with him on. And certainly, Boris Johnson has the lowest moral compass of any of the Prime Ministers, any of our previous Prime Ministers, without doubt.
But I'm just thinking about this, right? If you're Farage and you're just thinking about how do I get the most votes for my party, the place you're going to get votes from is Conservatives who are angry with their own party. And the Conservatives who are angriest are the Boris Johnson fans because they think Sunak stabbed him in the back. So I don't know why Farage, would attack Johnson like this, because it might put them off.
Well, I think it's first and foremost, and I think Jemma alluded to this, I think it's about Johnson actually, but I think it applies to Farage, is that he's self-serving, first and foremost. He's self-serving. So a cracking headline from his point of view, to keep him out there, high profile from that point of view. And I think that is his main agenda.
OK. And maybe there'll be sympathy. People say, if he blames the war in Ukraine on the EU, he might get votes out of that. A lot of people still do not think the EU is a good thing.
Well, the worry is that people will believe it. And they will follow what Nigel is saying because, as I say, he is, like Boris, he's got talents, he's got great communication and oral abilities to, fire people up. But I still think the fundamentals of, look, Boris Johnson made mistakes. Can't get away from that at all. But, he had an ability to inspire the country to get that 80-seat majority, yes, to talk about things like levelling up, which is so important to this country and so important to communities that have been left behind.
If you can't talk about it and not do it.
Well, and then, having come in 2019 with the stonking majorities, and then be hit with COVID, which was a international crisis of which nobody knew really how to deal with, I'm afraid to say. Yes, of course, that was the undoing of Boris Johnson. But getting the vaccine programme rolled out, making sure that actually we can unlock when we did as quickly as we could have done. Otherwise, we would still be in lockdown now, probably if the Labour government was still in.
Oh, that's such a ridiculous thing to say.
Because they wanted us locked down for longer, and Boris
longer
did
and harder.
Good things.
It seems like a lifetime ago now, COVID, doesn't it? Unless you lost somebody, in which case I know it doesn't. Thanks, Tony. Rowena in Cheshire, hi.
Hi.
So, is Boris Johnson the worst Prime Minister in history? Or is that unfair on Liz Truss?
Definitely not. I don't think Liz Truss is either. I think Tony Blair was.
Okay.
Definitely. I think Nigel Farage would be the worst Prime Minister we ever had. What I rang in to say is we're not concentrating on what Nigel Farage says about Putin when he says that he admired him as a political leader and how he'd taken control of Russia. And I think that's really bad, considering that, sort of the atrocities that Russia, that he's done, and also he controls the people by controlling what news they're allowed to hear.
Oh, for sure. But listen, we're talking about something else, which is about whether Boris Johnson is the worst Prime Minister.
Oh, he's definitely not.
Not as bad as Tony Blair.
Boris Johnson.
Okay.
Tony Blair.
Tony Blair.
Definitely.
Thank you. Yeah. All right. Well, two arguably illegal wars was a big factor there. Christine in Staffordshire, hi.
Hi, good morning.
Is Boris Johnson the worst Prime Minister since, I don't know, Edward Heath?
Well, he's one of them. I would put together him, Truss, and Cameron is another one. And Margaret Thatcher. We have had so many years of Conservative rule, and Boris being the worst one from the point of view that he was quite prepared to prorogue Parliament, to lie to the Queen, to have parties when our Queen was mourning the death of her husband. I think that speaks volume to the man's lack of moral compass, as a previous caller had said. And the comment that the gentleman presenter made about Gordon Brown, he seems to forget, yes, we had the financial crash, but Gordon Brown was one of the architects of getting us all, and I'm counting across the world, out of it.
Is he? Okay,
safely,
right.
without banks going bust.
All right, thank you. I heard somebody, I think Sunak mentioned yesterday, the note saying there is no money left, which is
that was
I know it's a long time. I know, but it's still there.
There's double the amount of no money left now.
Okay, thank you, Christine. Thanks for all your calls on this.